basic sample. One moment that left me feeling guilty was when I broke my friend's favorite Lego model during a visit to his house. While I was admiring the lovely Lego space station on the shelf, I accidentally knocked it over, and the model shattered into pieces. I immediately confessed and apologized for my carelessness. My friend kindly accepted my apology. However, the guilt stayed with me because I knew the effort my friend had invested in building the model. I decided to ask for the model and promised to put it together within a week. From this experience, I learned a valuable lesson about respecting other people's belongings. The incident made me realize the importance of being careful, especially when in someone else's space. I also recognized the need for giving sincere apologies for any mistakes. The solution to reducing guilt is making up for the mistake through meaningful actions, not just by using words. Advanced sample. In the world of human emotions, guilt is a sensation that leaves a deep mark. One such instance emerged during our sports day last year. As the class leader, I had been tasked with arranging lunch for our class. However, caught up in the excitement of watching a basketball match, I allowed my attention to stray and completely neglected to place the lunch order. When noon arrived and my classmates inquired about lunch, I realized my oversight. In a desperate attempt, I rushed to the nearest convenience store and hastily purchased sandwiches, bread and drinks as a replacement solution. By 12:30 p.m., my classmates had finally sat down to have their lunch. Even though the issue was ultimately resolved and my classmates didn't blame me, the sense of guilt still lingered. The incident served as a strong lesson about setting priorities. Completing tasks that people have assigned me should be my top priority. It also made me understand the significance of my commitments and the impact of my actions on others. My classmates chose me as their representative because they trusted me, and I shouldn't have let them down. From that day, I pledged to approach my responsibilities with the greatest diligence to avoid similar mistakes in the future. Perhaps many years later, this will be seen as a mere anecdote from a sports day event. Nevertheless, there is no denying that it imparted a valuable lesson upon me. So hi everyone, welcome to English Digest. I'm Pat.
I'm Elsie.
And our topic-based writing for this month is about guilt and feeling guilty.
Ho-ho.
Do we have any guilty secrets to confess, or at least ones that we don't mind confessing live on a broadcast?
Why do I feel guilty all the time?
I don't know, Elsie. Why?
I feel guilty.
What did you do?
After I eat junk food? Is that called guilty feeling?
Then yeah, you can feel like, I shouldn't have eaten that.
Right, and I feel guilty after I go to bed too late or get up too late.
I feel tired.
Tired and guilty at the same time.
Okay.
And I feel guilty after I yell at my husband.
Okay.
So, I shouldn't have done that.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Yes, I would feel guilty if I'm maybe a little bit too harsh with my kids. Like they don't deserve that necessarily. But what about something bigger? You got anything
Something bigger?
Yeah.
Like when I was in high school, one of my close friends, she always wanted to stay next to me. Mm-hmm. So whenever I needed to go to the bathroom, she would want to go with me.
Okay.
So I would yell at her.
Oh.
For doing that.
You call her Gongpichong.
Gongpichong.
Yes.
Maybe even more harsh than that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So now we're still friends, but not that close.
Okay. You drove her away.
Right.
One thing when I was a teenager, I occasionally would take things from shops. Not as a regular thing, just sort of if you're there with a group of friends and you kind of, everyone's sort of doing it, you might steal something very small and stuff. I don't actually feel guilty about that. It's not something, it's like, oh yeah, I can't believe what I did. I've ruined my criminal record and I've let down, I've damaged this company's profits. No, it doesn't really feel guilty. It's just kind of one of those things as a kid. I feel guilty about other stuff, but it's personal stuff. It's stuff about people, not about kind of doing a bit naughty things.
Right.
So yeah, and I think both of those, that idea that what you feel guilty most about is hurting others is reflected in both of these stories.
Right. Like one time I stole an umbrella from a library when I was in college.
Goodness me.
And my best friend said to me, Elsie, I'm so disappointed in you.
Okay.
After that, I never steal any umbrella.
But probably because you felt more guilty about letting your friend down than about whoever's umbrella it was losing it, because that's a stranger.
Right.
So, yeah, both of these are about disappointing others. The second one more than the first in our samples, but we'll look at those. So let's get into our topic, which is the instructions describe a time you felt guilty. And we've got two paragraphs. The idea is the first paragraph describes the sequence of events, so you just say what happened. And the second paragraph depicts how you dealt with the guilt afterward and what lessons you learned from the experience. Now, you could put some of the guilt part in day one. We've done that in the basic sample a bit, so you don't have to stick absolutely to these instructions, but they're a pretty good outline.
今天的提示呢，给的是当自己犯了错，让他人受到伤害的时候，我们的心中呢会萌生一股愧疚感。请写一篇短文，描述一个令你感到愧疚的时刻。文分两段，第一段描述这件事的始末，第二段描述事发之后，你如何消除愧疚感，并且从这个经验当中学到了什么。文长至少是120个单词。
Yeah, 120 words minimum. So since this piece of writing describes something that happened to you, make sure you're writing in first person. So I did this, I went here, I felt this. Now it's going to be a past tense narrative. This happened in the past, so that is going to be your main tense, particularly in the first paragraph. You might use some present perfect or past perfect when it's appropriate, and you might want to use a little bit of present tense in the conclusion to talk about how you are different now.
接下来到了 develop and approach 的地方，我们第一个要来了解的是什么是叙述文。叙述文呢是一种运用非常广泛的文体，常常出现在大考的作文题目当中。常见的类型有：第一个，描述经验或事件；第二个，描述物品；第三个，描述人物。那依据题目的要求，本篇写作呢是关于自己犯错的始末与后续的发展，属于描述经验或是事件的叙述文。
So this is a common style of question, asking the writers to describe a time, an event, an incident, something like that. Remember, you can make something up if you can't think of a real one, or if you feel too guilty to write about it. Coming up with a good story is more important than telling the truth. This is not an exercise of telling the truth. It's a writing challenge. So borrow a friend's experience. Write something that's a little bit like the plot of a movie or story you know well. Just come up with an idea, anything that gives you inspiration. Just remember, bad artists steal, but good artists imitate.
好，接下来到了写什么跟怎么写的部分。英文作文的架构呢，基本上分为引言 introduction、文章的主体 body， 还有结论 conclusion。那本篇叙述文呢，也是以此架构发展哦。
So with a lot of these essays, you still need the structure with an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Your second paragraph will also need a topic sentence to make sure that readers are clear, okay, we've moved on from the incident and we're now on to something else. So don't forget to think about your topic sentence for the second paragraph as you're planning your essay approach and making an outline.
Introduction 是文章的引言，那说明文章要探讨的主题跟动机。全文的主旨句，也就是 thesis statement， 常常在这边点出来。那在描述经验的文章当中啊 ，Introduction 除了可以如本次基础范文直接破题之外，还有以下的几种写法。第一个，在此经验发生之前，你对它抱持什么样的看法态度？第二个，一般人对此经验的看法又是什么？第三个，事后回顾这个经验的时候的体悟或是感受，这个就是进阶范文里面用到的方式。
With your introduction, you want to let the reader know what this essay will be about. So you'll state that you'll never forget a particular time you felt guilty or something like that. You could also start with a general kind of sentence like guilt is a powerful emotion or making mistakes is terrible, but you can learn from them. This will communicate the theme of what you're doing and give a general idea before you get into your specific incident.
处理好了引言的部分之后呢，就到了 body， 也就是文章的主体。那必须要叙述许多相关的细节，也就是 supporting details。那细节呢，必须和主题相关，要使主题生动，让人家印象深刻。那在叙述整个经验的过程当中呢，可以依照事件发生的时间顺序来描写哦。那你也可以选择用倒叙法，两种都可以。那在时态的选择上面，因为已经是描述已经发生的事情，所以通常是以过去式系列为主的。那另外还要特别注意整篇文章时态的一致性，好，时态不要跳来跳去的。那以下呢为常见的叙述文架构。第一个，何时发生 when， 何地发生Where， 还有就是参与者是谁，好，为何人，那就是 who 的部分。那再来呢是为什么会发生 Why， 还有如何发生的，也就是 how。接下来是事件如何收场，结果是什么 The result， 还有 consequence， 好，分别为何。再来事件发生过程中与事后有什么样的感受 How you felt， 好，这个是很重要的一个部分。
The body is where you put all your details. For the first paragraph, you're telling the story, and so you do it in chronological order. That's the order in which the events happened. Include all these details that Elsie just mentioned, when, where, who, why and how, and so on, 5 W's, 1 H. Describe what happened as a result of what you did.And in the second paragraph, you'll be talking about what you did after the event and what's happening now. So this could be apologizing, changing your behavior, making up for what happened. Again, you'll want to put the events in the right order, but you want to concentrate on your feelings here and how this impacted you rather than another person. So get some good descriptive adjectives in there. It's fine to use some of the words in this paragraph to say how the guilt was tearing you apart inside and so on.
好，那最后呢就到了 conclusion， 也就是文章的结论部分。在描述经验或事件的文章最后呢，你可以举出因为有了这个经验才开始出现的行为或想法，也就是这个经验怎么样改变了你。那以说明呢这次事件为自己带来了什么样的改变跟影响。
So with the conclusion, you're really focusing on what you learned from the experience or how the experience changed you. And keep this fairly short, 1 or 2 sentences, and try and make it seem significant. You know, if it's just like, oh, I won't do this next time, maybe you haven't really learned that much. So try and work in some kind of real change of behavior, a revelation, some kind of insight that has made you a better person.Okay, now we're going to look at some brainstorming.
在 brainstorming time 的部分呢，我们要看到的是在书写经验的写作当中，我们经常使用的是顺序法，也就是依照事件发生的时间顺序来描写这个整个完整的历程。
When we talked about our approach, we mentioned the importance of presenting the events in chronological order. And you need to have this clear in your mind when you start writing so that you don't jump around and confuse everyone in the story. Yes, you'll also need to note down your 5 W's and 1 H, but you can use any kind of notes for that. In order to show the event sequence in the right order, however, you can use a timeline, and we've got one of these in our article. You could go from the top to the bottom of the page, or like our one, you could go from left to right. So we've got this line, we've got the boxes 1 to 6, and we've got the things that happen and when they happen, so you can see the right order. And here's what goes into each box for the basic sample. So 1 is I was admiring my friend's Lego model. So that's just the setup, the start. So then we can see a bit more time passes. 2, I accidentally knocked the model over. And then there's not much of a time gap to 3, I immediately confessed and apologized. There's a bit longer until 4, my friend accepted my apology. Maybe they had to think about it for a bit and swallow their anger. And then you, the writer, thinks about it for a bit before 5, I decided to ask for the model and put it together within a week. So maybe they ask for this when they leave their friend's house or the day after, however long it took. And then 6, the final thing, I learned a valuable lesson about respecting other people's belongings. This is the important revelation and basically the conclusion to the article.
在我们的提示当中呢，我们说文分要2段，好，2段的文章，第一段是描述这个事情的始末，所以你在这边呢也有看到他清楚的描述始末哦。第一个他说呢，我正在欣赏朋友的乐高模型，然后我不小心弄倒了这个模型，我马上告诉我的朋友并且道歉。那最后是朋友接受我的道歉，然后我决定用1个礼拜的时间帮朋友重新组好这个模型。那接下来到了第2段，在描述事发之后，你如何消除愧疚感？还有从此经验当中学到了什么，就是我们刚刚听到的第6点，我学到了宝贵的教训，也就是要尊重他人的物品。
So this timeline covers and includes details from both paragraphs. 1 to 5 are all details from the first, and only 6 really covers the second paragraph. And that's fine. Both paragraphs don't need to be the same length. In fact, for this kind of essay, the first paragraph should probably be a bit longer, so you have enough words to properly describe the incident. The part about your feelings and the lessons you learned can be a little shorter. You can kind of do that in just a few sentences, really. So we're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we're going to make our outline and then discuss our samples. Okay, welcome back everybody. We're now going to make our outline, and that means putting the events from our timeline into the right order of sentences and thinking about our topic sentences and so on. We can connect the sentences and add more details as we write the paragraph later. So paragraph 1, our introduction is, one moment I felt guilty was when I broke my friend's favorite Lego model. Here, then, we have a very clear explanation of what happened and the fact it made the writer feel guilty. This introduction gets straight to the point and gives us some of the details, a bit about the what and a bit about the who.
是的，在第一段呢 introduction 的主题句当中啊，就直接点出来作者是在弄坏朋友的乐高的时候觉得愧疚。那接下来就会到了 body， 也就是主体的部分，那就要说明事发的经过了。
So here's the body, and this covers most of the incidents that were in our timeline, 1 to 5. A, I was admiring the Lego space station. B, I knocked it over and the model shattered into pieces. C, I confessed and apologized. D, my friend accepted my apology. E, the guilt stayed with me. An important point there. If the guilt didn't stay with the writer, then they wouldn't have learned from this experience and it wouldn't have been a good thing to write about. The fact that the guilt stayed with them is kind of the key to this piece. Then we've got F, I asked for the model and put it together within a week. So all the details here, and in the right order that we figured out with our timeline in our brainstorming session. So you could have chosen to put E and F in the second paragraph here if you wanted, and just finish the my friend accepted my apology as the end of the first paragraph, and then the guilt affecting the writer in the second paragraph on what they did about it. Both approaches are absolutely valid. As long as the article is smooth and reads well, there isn't just one correct way to write it. There are multiple possibilities, and it's up to you which one you think looks better.
是的，那再特别提醒同学一下哦，这边的 E， 好，他说 The guilt stayed with me， 他这边呢加上当时的感受，那愧疚感就这样一直跟着我，这是很重要的句子。那在范文当中呢 E 跟 F 它被放在第一段的尾巴，它有承上启下的作用。那如果你想要将 E 跟 F 一并放到第二段的开头也是可以的。
So now we move on to paragraph 2, where our writer talks about their learnings. Starts by saying, I learned a valuable lesson about respecting other people's belongings. Another good topic sentence because, once again, it makes it clear what the topic of the second paragraph is.
第二段呢，着重在宝贵教训的描写。那我们来看看作者放上去的 details 有哪一些。
Yep, the details are A, the incident made me realize I should be careful in someone else's space, and B, I also recognize the need for giving sincere apologies. So a couple of learnings here about different aspects of what happened. The first is simple. It's about how to stop similar things happening again. The second is about dealing with saying sorry if something like this does occur.Both of these are equally important. You do want to make sure that you don't make the same mistake twice, but you also need to think about what's the best way to apologize when I've done something wrong. Not just saying sorry, but actually doing something more, which will lead to our conclusion that we'll see in a moment.
在 details 的部分呢，我们看到有 A， 这次事件让我了解我在他人的空间当中必须要小心。还有第二个 B， 我也知道了诚恳道歉的重要性。那陈述完之后呢，就要到了 conclusion 的部分。
Yeah, the conclusion is leading on from B in that. The solution to reducing guilt is making up for the mistake through meaningful actions. And that, as well as the person's learning, is the good kind of moral of the story, the message to carry home. The point being meaningful actions to make up for something that you've done wrong, not just saying sorry.
在结论部分呢，提到减低愧疚感的方式就是用有意义的行动来弥补过错，那可能是诚恳的道歉啦，或是不再犯同样的错误，或者是在 outline 架构当中我们看到的帮朋友组回去模型，这些都可以。
The outline can then have more details, transitions, and so on added as you turn it into a full essay, but make sure you still follow that logical, sensible structure and don't leave out any details. And as I always say, you do all that figuring out in the outline and the brainstorming, because then when you go to write it, you've already made your kind of mistakes and figured things out. You don't have to completely start again. Once you've got your outline right, you can get the rest of the essay right.We're now going to take a look at the samples. With the basic sample, it followed the outline we used pretty closely. It added a few details to make the story seem a little more vivid, a little more alive, like the extra reasons for the person feeling guilty. We've got the sentence, however, the guilt stayed with me because I knew the effort my friend had invested in building the model. So this is Lego, which means the pieces of Lego are actually quite difficult to break.by themselves, but when you put them all together, and if you drop them, you won't necessarily break the pieces, you'll break the overall structure.
Yeah, it just takes time to put them back.
A lot of time and effort, and somebody who's just done it won't really feel like doing it again anytime soon. So it's not that you've broken something that costs money, it's you've ruined the effort that this person has invested in the model, the time and care that they've taken.Very
true. 那在这篇当中呢，还用到了一些副词来修饰动作，让文章更加生动哦。比如说有 accidentally 意外地 immediately 立刻马上，还有 kindly 这些副词哈 kindly 就是亲切友善的。那还有像是呢 shatter into pieces 也可以把它学起来，那就是散成破成碎片。还有就是那个很重要刚刚都有讲到的句子 the guilt stayed with me 愧疚感跟着我。那还有最后说到的 the effort my friend invested in something 那就是我朋友投入的努力，这边用到 invest 这个动词。
That sentence is really important because if you just broken something that could be easily replaced, you maybe wouldn't feel quite as guilty because you can just buy a new one. Here, you're not costing the friend money, you've kind of ruined their time and their effort and their care and creative love in building something. That you can't put a price on. So this particular sentence changes what you feel guilty about from just like physical damage, monetary damage, financial damage, to more like emotional damage. You've let the person down, which goes back to what Elsie and I were talking about in the introduction, and it's also what's going to be in the advanced sample. So there's the theme in all of this about you have let some people down, and that's what you feel guilty about. So the advanced sample gets a lot more descriptive. And again, it's not really about what the person did in terms of making a mistake. It's about what that means. And this isn't a physical accident of being clumsy. This situation happened because a person didn't keep a promise and now feels like they are responsible for not being responsible. So there's a bit of a contrast here between the physical mistake in the first one, a bit of clumsiness, and a mental one. The latter is usually more serious because it means the person wasn't thinking carefully and they weren't treating something as important. You can probably write a more advanced sample with this sort of thing because it's not just oh, whoops, I broke something and nobody was really at fault. This is, you should have done something, you promised to do something, you didn't do something. And you've kind of almost made a choice there not to do that thing.
是的，那在进阶范文当中呢，我们看到了更多的 details， 不论是在描述事件发生的经过，还有这个作者本人他的心得，好，我们都看到更多的细节。
Yeah, there's quite a lot of good vocabulary in here. Attention strayed. It was my oversight. The guilt lingered, which is a more complex synonym of stay. You can see the translations for these in our article. We're going to skip over most of those now and take a look at our grammar tips.
在 grammar tips 当中啊，有一个非常重要的用法就是 desperate attempt， 它是什么意思呢？在中文当中是孤注一掷或是情急之下，所以啊，常常用来描述在困境当中，你为了解决问题而做出的最后尝试。那像是这样的例句，你可以说啊 ，In a desperate attempt to save the company, Dan invested all his savings into the business。为了挽救公司，这个 Dan 他孤注一掷，将所有的积蓄都投入到生意当中。
So the second story, the key again is you haven't really hurt anybody. You've just meant that they have to eat a simple 7-Eleven lunch instead of a nicer set of lunch boxes or whatever you're going to order. It's not a big thing. That's why in the end, the writer says this will probably end up being seen as just an anecdote. And that be seen as is another grammar point.
是的，这边呢，我们用到的是用 see 来当做我们的动词，那还有 view 啦，还有 regard, think of, look on 或是 look upon， 好，加上去 A as B， 那就是英文当中很常见的句型，用来表示呢将 A 视为 B。那文章当中用到的是被动态，我们用到 passive here。Mm-hmm.
And so it's a simple story that his friends now probably just laugh about, but there's no denying that it actually affected the writer and how they view things in the future.
There's no denying 的用法非常重要哦，在中文当中呢是不可否认、毋庸置疑。那这个常见的句型后面呢，还可以直接加上名词，或是加上 that， 再加上一个完整的子句。
Okay, that brings us to the end of today's article. Hope you've learned some useful writing tips on us. Thanks very much for listening. For English Digest, I'm Pat.
I'm Elsie.
And we'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye.